On August 14, 2026, NATO aircraft shot down a drone over Latvia. It was the latest object to cross a border that, on paper, separates war from peace. Its origin was not immediately established. That uncertainty is the point. Since Russia expanded its war against Ukraine in 2022, missiles, attack drones, fragments, military aircraft, and unidentified small drones have entered or appeared above NATO territory. Some were assessed as accidents. Some were called reckless, others looked like tests of the alliance, and several remain unattributed. Every incident creates the same compressed decision: track, identify, warn, intercept, or wait. Act too slowly and people may die. Act too quickly and an ambiguous machine can become a military exchange between nuclear powers. This film follows how Europe reached that threshold, what NATO is legally obliged to do, why Washington is increasingly stretched, and which pathways could turn a contained war into something much larger. Timeline begins in 2014, not 2022. After Ukraine's Maidan uprising removed President Viktor Yanukovych, Russia seized and annexed Crimea. Russian-backed forces then fought the Ukrainian state in the Donbass. Moscow described the post-Maidan government and NATO's eastward expansion as threats to Russian security. Ukraine and its partners argued that a sovereign country had the right to choose its alignment. The Minsk agreements reduced some fighting but never produced a durable settlement. By late 2021, Russia had massed forces around Ukraine while demanding limits on NATO activity and a closed door to Ukrainian membership. On February 24, 2022, President Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion. Russia called it a special military operation and presented security, Donbass, and demilitarization as justifications. The United Nations General Assembly condemned the invasion as aggression. The disagreement over NATO mattered politically. It did not erase Ukraine's sovereignty or make the invasion lawful. That distinction anchors this documentary's neutral approach: explain competing narratives without treating every narrative as equally supported by evidence. Russia's opening drive toward Kyiv failed. Ukrainian forces held the capital, and Russia withdrew from the north in spring 2022. Ukraine later retook territory around Kharkiv and Kherson, but the war did not end. It hardened into artillery battles, trenches, minefields, and attacks on energy systems. Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive gained little ground. Russia recovered the initiative in 2024, while Ukraine opened a new axis with its incursion into Russia's Kursk region. By 2025 and 2026, both sides were striking far beyond the front. Russia launched massed missiles and one-way attack drones against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Ukraine used domestically developed drones against airfields, refineries, ports, and military targets deep inside Russia. This long-range contest matters to NATO because geography is unforgiving. Ukraine borders Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. The Baltic theater sits beside Russia and Belarus. A weapon can fail, be jammed, lose navigation, or follow a route that places it seconds from alliance airspace. A battlefield measured in hundreds of kilometers now touches borders measured in seconds of flight. On November 15, 2022, an explosion killed 2 people in Przyrzudo, a Polish village near Ukraine. Early reports suggested a Russian missile had struck NATO territory. For several hours, the information gap carried enormous weight. Poland raised military readiness. Allied leaders consulted. Then the assessment changed. NATO and Polish officials said the missile was probably a Ukrainian air defense weapon fired against a large Russian barrage, not a deliberate Russian attack on Poland. NATO still said Russia bore ultimate responsibility for creating the attack that Ukraine was defending against. But the alliance did not treat the incident as an armed attack by Ukraine or Russia. Przyrzudo established a pattern that would repeat. The first headline arrives before debris analysis, radar tracks, and intent. Social media fills the vacuum. Political leaders must reassure the public while avoiding claims that evidence may overturn. 2 civilians were dead, yet restraint was not indifference. It was escalation control. The lesson was uncomfortable. Even defensive fire can cross a border, and attribution can be the difference between tragedy and collective war. 2023, Russia intensified attacks on Ukrainian ports along the Danube after leaving the Black Sea grain arrangement. The river is also a NATO boundary. Romania first rejected Ukrainian claims that Russian drones had fallen on its territory. Searches then found fragments resembling drones used in Russian attacks. More debris followed. NATO called the violations dangerous and increased surveillance, but said it had no evidence that Moscow intended to strike Romania. That phrasing was deliberate. A violation can be real without proving an attack. Romania built shelters, issued phone alerts, and moved air defense resources toward the border. Allied aircraft increased patrols. The response raised resilience without declaring that Article 5 had been triggered. Yet repeated incursions changed public expectations. What looks like an isolated navigation failure once becomes harder to dismiss after the 5th or 10th event. Romania also exposed a practical gap. Conventional radar and fighter patrols were designed for aircraft and missiles, not a steady stream of small, low-flying drones approaching through cluttered terrain. The spillover was becoming a system problem, not a single accident. The pattern widened in 2024. On March 24th, Poland said a Russian cruise missile entered its airspace during an attack on western Ukraine, remained briefly, and then returned toward Ukraine. Polish aircraft were activated, but commanders said they would have engaged if the missile appeared directed at a Polish target. In September, a Russian Shad-type attack drone entered Latvia from Belarus and crashed in Rizekne municipality. Latvian authorities said the drone carried explosives that did not detonate. Romania continued finding fragments and scrambling fighters during attacks across the Danube. None of these episodes became a NATO-Russia firefight, but each demanded more sensors, patrols, and political explanation. They also revealed why intent is difficult to read from a flight path alone. A weapon may cross a border because of route planning, failure, electronic warfare, or deliberate probing. Defenders see only a moving track and incomplete intelligence. By the end of 2024, NATO's eastern members were no longer asking whether spillover could occur. They were asking what level of repetition should change the rules of engagement. Threshold moved on September 10, 2025. Poland said roughly 20 Russian drones entered its airspace during a large attack on Ukraine, some arriving from Belarus. Polish and Allied aircraft engaged several of them. It was the first known occasion in the war when NATO forces fired on Russian military drones inside Allied airspace. Warsaw called the event a major provocation and requested consultations under Article 4. Russia said it had not planned targets in Poland. Belarus said some drones had lost their course after jamming and that it had warned neighbors. NATO did not need to settle motive before responding to the violation. 2 days later, it launched Eastern Sentry, combining fighters, surveillance, and air defense assets across the eastern flank. The incident also exposed an economic asymmetry. A cheap decoy or attack drone can force the launch of an air-to-air missile costing vastly more. Defenders cannot ignore the track, but they cannot spend premium interceptors indefinitely. Poland demonstrated resolve. It also demonstrated why Europe needed a layered counter-drone architecture rather than an emergency fighter response every time a small engine appears on radar. Days after the Polish incursion, Estonia said 3 Russian MiG-31 fighters entered its airspace for about 12 minutes. Russia denied the violation. Elsewhere, unidentified drones disrupted airports or appeared near military bases, ports, and critical infrastructure. Some governments suspected Russian involvement. Public attribution often remained cautious. That caution matters. Small quadcopter near a base may be espionage, protest, criminal activity, hobby flying, or a state operation. Larger military drones approaching from a combat zone present a different evidence chain. Combining every sighting into one proven campaign would outrun the public record, but ignoring the pattern would also be misleading. European investigators and independent analysts documented repeated incidents around sensitive facilities and transport nodes. NATO's problem became two-layered: defend the eastern border from weapons connected to active combat, while protecting the interior from deniable surveillance or sabotage. The alliance could track a fighter with transponders off. It had a harder time identifying who launched a small drone from a field, vehicle, or vessel. Ambiguity itself had become operational cover. By August 2026, the gray zone had become more dangerous. German investigators examined an explosive-carrying drone found after it struck a Ukrainian cargo aircraft at Leipzig airport. Drones were then observed above the Metternich base, where Patriot systems are maintained. German officials and Western reporting pointed toward a foreign hybrid operation. Russia denied involvement. Along the eastern flank, NATO aircraft intercepted new incursions, including the drone shot down over Latvia. Other objects crashed in Romania or crossed Baltic airspace, and not all were Russian. Ukrainian long-range drones affected by navigation or electronic warfare were also reported beyond the battlefield. This is why a neutral account cannot turn every object into proof of one master plan. Origin, control, and intent are separate questions, yet the aggregate risk still rises. An explosive drone at a logistics hub is more serious than an unidentified light near a runway. A military drone crossing during a Russian strike is different from a Ukrainian vehicle diverted while attacking Russia. Defenders must make these distinctions in minutes, while investigators may need days. Drone can cross a border for at least 4 reasons. First, deliberate routing. The operator intends to probe, intimidate, surveil, or attack. Second, navigation error. Inertial drift, faulty terrain matching, or corrupted satellite signals can move a vehicle away from its planned track. Third, electronic warfare. Jamming can deny navigation, while spoofing can feed false position data. A defender may protect one target by diverting the threat toward another jurisdiction. Fourth, damage or loss of control. A partially disabled drone may continue until fuel runs out. Investigators reconstruct the cause from radar tracks, wreckage, memory components, antenna design, fuel state, and the wider attack pattern. Even then, intent may remain inferential. This technical ambiguity creates a strategic trap. NATO cannot assume that every crossing is accidental, because deliberate probing would then be rewarded. It cannot assume that every crossing is an attack, because that makes manipulation and malfunction potential triggers for war. The rational response is layered: better detection, cheaper interceptors, shared tracks, protected civil aviation, and political procedures that preserve time for attribution. Defender's second problem is arithmetic. A one-way drone may cost tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes less. A modern air-to-air or surface-to-air interceptor can cost hundreds of thousands or several million. Exact prices vary, and secrecy makes neat comparisons unreliable, but the direction is clear. If every inexpensive drone receives a premium missile, the attacker can drain magazines without destroying a target, yet letting one through may cost lives or critical infrastructure. Europe is responding with layers: acoustic and radio frequency sensors, radar, electronic jamming, interceptor drones, guns, short-range missiles, and fighters as the final backstop. NATO has created procurement routes for deployable counter-UAS systems, while several countries are expanding drone production and testing. The aim is not a perfect shield. No air defense network provides one. The aim is a favorable decision for each track. Identify it sooner, assign the cheapest effective response, and reserve scarce interceptors for the threats that require them. This is also a U.S. problem, because many of Europe's most capable sensors, aircraft, and missiles depend on American production or support. NATO's treaty is often reduced to one sentence: an attack on one is an attack on all. The real process has more judgment. Article 4 allows allies to consult when any member believes its security or territorial integrity is threatened. Poland used it after the 2025 drone incursion. Article 5 concerns an armed attack. NATO says whether an incident reaches that threshold is assessed case by case, and significant cyber or hybrid attacks may qualify. Provocation does not mechanically launch every member into identical combat. Each ally takes the action it considers necessary, including the use of armed force. Article 5 has been invoked only once, after the September 11th attacks on the United States. A stray weapon, unattributed drone, or brief airspace violation therefore does not automatically start a NATO-Russia war. Casualties, scale, repetition, attribution, and intent would shape the decision. The flexibility is designed to prevent both paralysis and automatic escalation, but it also leaves adversaries room to operate below a threshold they believe the alliance will hesitate to enforce. Wider war is more likely to emerge through a ladder than a single master decision. Step 1 is an incursion. Step 2 is interception. Step 3 is casualties, perhaps from the drone, perhaps from falling debris or a failed interceptor. Step 4 is retaliation against a launch site or supporting system. Step 5 is counter-retaliation, cyber attack or strikes on bases used for the response. At each rung, leaders may believe they are restoring deterrence, while the other side sees escalation. Geography compresses the cycle around Poland, the Baltic states, Kaliningrad, Belarus, and the Black Sea. Military aircraft operate close together. Air defenses can threaten platforms on the opposite side of a border. Electronic warfare obscures navigation and attribution. The scenario is plausible, but not inevitable. The same timeline contains repeated examples of restraint. Investigations before blame, Article 4 consultations, defensive deployments and communications designed to avoid direct combat. Deterrence and escalation control are not opposites. Effective deterrence sets clear limits. Effective control gives leaders a way to stop after those limits are enforced. Calling every incident the beginning of World War III is analytically useless. The probability of deliberate Russian invasion of NATO is not the same as the probability of an accidental clash, and analysts disagree about Moscow's future intent. A useful framework separates likelihood from consequence. A stray drone has relatively high likelihood but usually limited consequence. Deliberate strike causing mass casualties on NATO territory is less likely but could trigger collective military action. Direct NATO attacks on Russian strategic forces are less likely still, but carry severe escalation potential. The most dangerous zone combines uncertainty with time pressure, an ambiguous incoming salvo, casualties, disrupted communications, and leaders who fear that waiting will invite another strike. Risk also changes over time. If NATO improves low-cost defense and Russia believes incursions achieve little, the incentive to probe falls. If alliance responses appear divided or U.S. forces are unavailable, the incentive may rise. The documentary's conclusion is therefore conditional. A general war is not imminent by definition, but the mechanisms that could produce one are now exercised more often. Russia and the United States hold most of the world's nuclear weapons. SIPRI estimated roughly 12,187 warheads globally in January 2026, with more than 2,000 deployed warheads on high operational alert, overwhelmingly American and Russian. The last bilateral treaty limiting their strategic arsenals expired in February 2026 without a replacement. Nuclear weapons do not make every conventional clash nuclear. They usually encourage caution by making uncontrolled escalation catastrophic, but they also create a ceiling beneath which states may take risks, believing the other side will avoid a direct war. Russia has used nuclear signaling throughout the Ukraine conflict. NATO maintains nuclear deterrence while supporting Ukraine and avoiding direct participation in the war. The danger lies in misreading that balance. Conventional strike near command, warning, or nuclear-capable systems may be interpreted differently than intended. A cyber attack can add uncertainty. Arms control erosion removes verification and communication habits precisely when they are most needed. Nuclear risk is therefore less a countdown than a problem of damaged guardrails. For Washington, Europe is only one theater. The United States is supporting NATO and Ukraine, sustaining major operations and partners in the Middle East, and trying to deter China in the Indo-Pacific. These missions draw on overlapping assets: Patriot and THAAD interceptors, air defense ships, long-range missiles, tankers, surveillance aircraft, logistics units, and industrial capacity. 2026, fighting with Iran sharply increased concern about depleted American interceptor stocks. The Pentagon pressed manufacturers to accelerate production. Independent war games have repeatedly found that some long-range munitions could be exhausted quickly in a high-intensity Taiwan conflict. This does not mean the United States is defenseless or that all weapons are interchangeable. A shell for Ukraine is not automatically a missile for the Pacific. The dilemma is at the margins: which scarce system deploys first, which ally waits, and how much reserve must remain for a war that has not begun. Strategic prioritization can strengthen deterrence in one theater while creating doubt in another. Adversaries may watch for that gap. Policy choices often framed falsely. Either America carries every theater, or it abandons allies. Either NATO ignores incursions, or it starts a war. There are intermediate strategies. Europe can finance and produce more ammunition, drones, and air defense, freeing scarce American systems for missions only the United States can perform. NATO can share sensor data and standardize counter-drone rules. Ukraine can contribute battlefield knowledge while allies control where NATO personnel operate. Diplomacy can preserve military hotlines, incident notifications, and arms control talks without accepting territorial conquest. Sanctions and support can impose costs without direct NATO strikes. Each option has limits. European rearmament takes years. Defense spending competes with domestic priorities. Negotiations can be used to regroup. Restraint can be misread as weakness. Firmness can be misread as preparation for attack. A neutral assessment does not pretend these trade-offs disappear. It asks which combination reduces both aggression and accidental escalation. The strongest alliance response is one that is credible, affordable, legally understood, and sustainable beyond the next emergency. Turn to the drone over Latvia. One aircraft detected it, another tracked it. A commander authorized an interception. Investigators began the slower work of establishing origin and intent. That sequence is the new border between the Russia-Ukraine war and NATO. It is built from sensors, rules, evidence, industrial capacity, and political judgment, not a line on a map alone. 4 years of spillover show both danger and restraint. Weapons have crossed. People have died in Poland. NATO has fired on Russian drones. Russian aircraft have been accused of entering Allied airspace, yet leaders have repeatedly stopped short of direct war. The risk grows when incursions become normal, defenses are too expensive, attribution is politicized, nuclear guardrails weaken, and the United States must divide attention among several major crises. It falls when Europe can defend cheaply, allies consult quickly, evidence outruns rumor, and every side understands the next rung of the ladder. World war is not predetermined. Neither is peace. Between them lies a chain of decisions, often made in minutes, beneath a small object moving across a dark sky.